I don't particularly think of something being a portrait or being figurative necessarily, as much as it is important to me to find what's interesting in how I represent the human image. And it's really more about representation and the kind of iconography that I'm able to establish in that representation of the human image. So I don't think about it as a portrait or as a figure or as being necessarily figurative or anything that becomes captioned in that way. I'm more interested in sort of the larger characterization of what the human image represents emotively in a very specific way, but also in a larger, more grand, universal context. Well, I work from life, and it's important in my work that I do work from a real experience, and it has a lot to do with how the experience itself becomes somehow made tangible in the process, and how that process becomes represented on a page. The thing that we're left with begins to feel in many ways like a relic or like a series of marks that become connected to a selective process that is connected to a true and believable experience. And the process, or at least the selective process, is something that can only occur over a sequence of many moments, and how those moments build, and each moment becomes something unexpected. Whereas if you were to take a photograph, it's a 30th of a 40th of a second, and it's just a single moment that image is captured. That the process feels that it's organic, that there is an organic connection to the way in which there's a sensitivity to the moment. So each moment becomes, in many ways, made special, made personal, and because it's so intimate and selective. In the same way, I mean, I like to think about us as individuals as being incredibly unique, and there's something miraculous about the unique characteristics of everything in nature, including us as human beings. When we draw and we paint, what it is that we're sort of ultimately connected to, and that is a way of somehow holding on to something that's basically fleeting and temporary. The majority of my painting is probably of people from a variety of aspects of life. So there's a variety of people that are portrayed, and whereas in my drawing, I think the figure is probably more predominant, and I think that in many ways is connected to the idea that drawing itself is somehow rooted in the human proportion, and the way in which we think about proportion and how we understand the figure as it becomes a measurement to the world, and how we see it in its sort of like purest. You say pure, you use the word pure, but the way we understand the figure as and just being able to draw it and understand the figure, to me, becomes almost like an exercise for my painting or for my other work. So I think about my drawing in that way, not necessarily as the main thing in my work, but as sort of a prerequisite in many ways to what it is that I'm ultimately after in some of the more complex, larger paintings. What I mean by proportion, it doesn't necessarily mean, well, the head's too big or the foot's too small, the hand's too big. But it's the way in which I think about measurement of shapes and how those shapes as forms are understood in my representation of a human image. An example would be if you were to paint, let's say, a landscape. As soon as you put a human figure against a tree, then we understand the scale of the tree. So unconsciously, we as human beings identify and envision the world because of the way we understand our proportion against it. So that has so much to do with the reason for drawing and painting a figure for me, is that it somehow begins to become kind of a connection. It begins to connect on a deeper level how I can understand proportion as it relates from one shape to another or from one object to another. And the most sort of basic form is the figure in order to do that.